The scent of rain-soaked pine needles mixed with expensive perfume made my stomach turn, or maybe it was the weight of 100 eyes on my back. Eyes that saw right through me, as if I were made of glass, transparent. Forgettable. The grand hall of the Crescent Moonpack buzzed with anticipation, chandeliers casting golden light over silk gowns and tailored suits. Everyone looked like they belonged in a painting. Everyone except me. I stood near the refreshment table, fingers clutching a crystal glass of champagne I hadn't asked for and wouldn't drink. My dress, a pale cream thing my stepmother had chosen, felt like a costume. Too loose in some places, too tight in others. She'd said it made me look presentable, which I'd learned was her code for barely acceptable. "You're standing in the light again," came a voice behind me, sharp as broken glass. I turned to see Celeste, my stepsister, gliding toward me in a dress the color of fresh blood. Her dark hair cascaded over bare shoulders, and her smile carried the particular cruelty she reserved just for me. Behind her, two of her friends followed like shadows. Vivian, with her calculating green eyes, and Serena, who always looked bored unless someone was suffering. I started, but Celeste cut me off with a laugh that turned heads. "Of course you weren't. You never mean to do anything, do you, Elena?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a theatrical whisper that somehow carried across the marble floor. "But I suppose it doesn't matter where you stand tonight. You could be center stage and he still wouldn't see you. I didn't need to ask who he was. Everyone in this room, in this territory, in every pack for 500 miles, knew who would arrive tonight, Alpha King Dante Ashford." The name alone carried weight, like something you'd whisper in the dark. 3 years ago, he'd united the fractured packs of the Northern Territories through a combination of strategic brilliance and raw, undeniable power. Some said he was the strongest alpha born in 2 centuries. Others said he was cursed, that something cold and unreachable lived behind those steel-gray eyes. Tonight, he was here to choose. Not a mate. That romantic notion belonged to fairy tales and old traditions. No, the Alpha King needed an alliance, a political bond to solidify his rule over the southern packs. And every unmated woman of status had been summoned to this gathering, dressed up like prizes on a shelf. "He'd never look at you," Celeste continued, her smile widening as Vivian and Serena flanked her sides. "You're not his type. You're not anyone's type, really." The words should have hurt more than they did. Maybe I'd grown scar tissue where soft skin used to be. My father had remarried 3 years ago, bringing Celeste and her mother into our home right after my own mother died. Since then, I'd learned to swallow humiliation like medicine. Bitter, but necessary for survival. "I'm not here to be chosen," I said quietly, trying to step around them. Serena blocked my path, examining her nails. "Then why are you here?" "Oh, right. Because your father insisted. How embarrassing for him, having to parade you around like you're worth something." "Like putting a wildflower in a bouquet of roses," Vivian added with a theatrical sigh. "It just makes the roses look better." I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper. My father had insisted I attend, though his eyes had barely met mine when he said it. These days, he rarely looked at me directly, as if I reminded him too much of my mother, or perhaps of his own failure to protect the pack's standing after her death. We'd fallen in ranking, become barely more than minor nobility in the pack hierarchy. This invitation was likely a courtesy, an acknowledgement of what we used to be rather than what we'd become. "Excuse me," I whispered, shouldering past them. Celeste's laughter followed me as I wove through clusters of beautiful people discussing politics and power. I caught fragments of conversation. Speculation about who the Alpha King would favor. Debates about bloodlines and territory disputes. My chest felt tight, like I was breathing through wet fabric. I found a side corridor and slipped into it, grateful for the sudden quiet. The stone walls here were older, part of the original fortress before someone had built this palace on top of it. I pressed my hand against the cool surface and closed my eyes. "You're stronger than they know," my mother's voice whispered in my memory. She used to tell me that, especially after difficult days at school when other children mocked my too pale hair, my too quiet nature, my tendency to disappear into books rather than games. Different isn't less, Elena. Remember that. But different felt like less when you were constantly reminded of it. A sudden commotion from the grand hall pulled me back. A shift in the atmosphere, like air pressure dropping before a storm. Voices rose and fell, then settled into an expectant hush. He was here. I should have stayed in the corridor, should have waited until the formalities were over, and I could slip away unnoticed, but something pulled me back toward the entrance of the hall, some self-destructive curiosity to see the man everyone feared and wanted in equal measure. The crowd had parted, forming a natural aisle. At the far end stood a group of men, but my eyes went immediately to the one in front, Alpha King. Dante Ashford was taller than I'd imagined, broad-shouldered in a way that suggested violence controlled, rather than violence absent. His dark hair was slightly too long, brushing the collar of his black suit, but it was his face that stopped the breath in my lungs, all sharp angles and hard lines, like someone had carved him from stone and forgotten to soften the edges. And his eyes. Even from this distance, I could see they were the color of storm clouds, cold and assessing as they swept across the room. He moved with absolute certainty, each step deliberate. The men flanking him, his advisors or guards, I couldn't tell, seemed almost like afterthoughts. One was built like a mountain, all muscle and contained aggression. Another was leaner, dark-skinned with an expression of bored intelligence. A third watched the crowd with the focused attention of a predator. "Ladies of the Southern Packs," the Alpha King's voice carried effortlessly across the hall, deep and textured like whiskey over gravel. "I appreciate your presence tonight." His gaze continued moving over the assembled women. I watched Celeste step forward slightly, her chin lifted, her dress catching the light. Beside her, other women did the same, a subtle competition of posture and presentation. They looked like flowers turning toward the sun. I stayed where I was, half hidden behind a marble column. "The purpose of this gathering," he continued, "is not entertainment. I need an alliance with a Southern Pack, and I need it secured by traditional bonds. What I'm looking for—" He paused, and something flickered across his face, too quick to read, "is not what you might expect." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't following the script. Usually these things were pure ceremony. The Alpha would meet with pack leaders, assess bloodlines and territories, make a calculated choice. But there was something in his tone, an edge of frustration or exhaustion, that suggested this was not a man going through pleasant motions. "I've spent 3 years building alliances through strategy and force," he said, his voice harder now. "What I haven't found is something simpler, something honest." His eyes continued their sweep of the room, dismissing faces, searching for what I didn't know, didn't want to know. I started to ease backward, ready to escape down the side corridor again. And then his gaze locked onto mine. Everything stopped. The noise of the room faded to a distant buzz. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare back at those steel gray eyes that pinned me in place like a butterfly on a board. His expression didn't change, no recognition, no interest, nothing, but he was looking at me, actually looking, not through me. Time stretched. A second became an hour, became a lifetime. Then someone coughed, breaking the spell. The Alpha King's attention shifted away as an older man, the host of tonight's gathering, Lord Brennan of the Southern Council, approached to greet him formally. The moment shattered like glass. I stumbled backward into the corridor, my heart hammering so hard I thought my ribs might crack. That was nothing, I told myself, a random glance. He'd been scanning the room, and my face happened to be in his line of sight. It meant nothing. But my hands were shaking. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. From the grand hall, I could hear Lord Brennan's booming voice making introductions, the Alpha King's measured responses. The formal part of the evening would continue for hours. Presentations, conversations, assessments. Eventually, he would make his choice or announce he needed more time. Either way, it had nothing to do with me. "There you are." I jumped. My father stood at the corridor entrance, his face drawn with an emotion I couldn't name. Disappointment? Concern? He looked older than he had this morning, the lines around his eyes deeper. "You need to come back," he said quietly. "It's disrespectful to hide. I'm not hiding. I just needed air. Elena." His voice carried a warning. "Your stepmother is already making excuses for your absence. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I wanted to ask him why he cared. why it mattered if I stood in that room full of people who looked through me like I was vapor. But the exhaustion in his eyes stopped me. He'd lost so much when my mother died. Not just her, but his standing, his certainty, maybe even himself. "Okay," I whispered. He nodded once and turned away, assuming I'd follow. I did, forcing my feet to move back toward the grand hall. But as I reached the entrance, a hand caught my wrist. I turned to find Celeste, her beautiful face twisted with something ugly. "I saw that," she hissed. "I saw him look at you." "It was nothing. You stay away from him." Her grip tightened, nails digging in. "Do you understand me? You're an embarrassment to this family. If you ruin this opportunity because of your pathetic need for attention, I'll make sure you regret it." She released me with a shove that sent me stumbling forward, right into the grand hall's entrance. Right into the direct line of sight of the Alpha King, who had turned toward the commotion. Our eyes met again. And this time, he didn't look away. The Alpha King's expression remained unreadable, but something shifted in the air between us, a current I couldn't name. His head tilted slightly, like he was trying to solve a puzzle that had unexpectedly presented itself. Behind him, the mountain of a man who served as his guard followed his gaze, then said something too quiet for me to hear. The Alpha King raised one hand in a gesture that silenced him immediately. I should have lowered my eyes. Protocol demanded it. You didn't hold an Alpha's stare, especially not the Alpha King's, especially not when you were nobody from a fallen house wearing a borrowed dress that didn't fit right. But my body had stopped taking orders from my brain. I stood frozen, caught in those storm cloud eyes like a rabbit facing down a wolf. "Lord Brennan," the Alpha King said, his voice cutting through the renewed murmur of conversation. "Who is that?" My stomach dropped through the marble floor. Lord Brennan followed the Alpha King's gaze, his bushy eyebrows rising when he spotted me. Confusion crossed his face, clear evidence that he'd forgotten I existed until this exact moment. "That is... let me see. Ah, yes. Elena Thorne, daughter of Lord Stefan Thorne of the Silverwood Pack." "Thorne," the Alpha King repeated, as if testing the weight of the name. "I don't recall that pack among the major southern houses. No, Your Majesty. They're..." Lord Brennan paused, searching for diplomatic phrasing. "A minor house. They've fallen on difficult times in recent years." The dismissal in his tone was clear. We were filler, names on a list to make the gathering look more impressive. The real prospects were women like Celeste, from families with power and influence. "I see." The Alpha King's gaze hadn't left me. "Bring her here." Time stopped again. Surely I'd misheard. Surely he meant someone else, someone standing near me who I hadn't noticed. But Lord Brennan was already gesturing to a servant, who scurried toward me with the expression of someone carrying out an incomprehensible order. "Miss Thorne," the servant whispered urgently, "the Alpha King requests your presence." My legs wouldn't move. The servant's eyes widened in panic. Refusing a direct summons from the Alpha King was unthinkable, potentially dangerous. Around me, I felt the weight of every eye in the hall turning toward this unexpected drama. Celeste's face had gone white, then red, her mouth opening in wordless shock. My stepmother, standing beside her, looked like she'd swallowed glass. Even my father seemed stunned, his hand raised halfway as if to stop something he couldn't quite comprehend. The servant touched my elbow. "Please, miss. Now." Somehow, my feet remembered how to walk. I moved forward through the crowd that parted like water, each step feeling like I was wading through deep snow. The distance between me and the Alpha King couldn't have been more than 30 feet, but it felt like miles. My dress caught on something, someone's shoe maybe, and I stumbled slightly, catching myself before I fell. Heat flooded my face. Of course. Of course I would trip in front of everyone. In front of him. This was some kind of cosmic joke, a final humiliation before... what? What did he want? To make an example of me for some breach of protocol I didn't understand? To publicly demonstrate the difference between worthy prospects and forgettable daughters of fallen houses? I stopped a respectful distance away, eyes finally dropping to the floor. My heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears, a war drum counting down to my execution. "Look at me." It wasn't a request. The Alpha King's voice carried absolute authority. the kind that made disobedience physically difficult. I raised my eyes slowly, taking in polished black shoes, perfectly tailored pants, a crisp white shirt under a black jacket. Then his face, those sharp angles, that hard mouth, those impossible eyes that seemed to see straight through skin and bone into whatever trembling thing lived at my core. Up close, he was devastating. Not handsome in any conventional sense. His features were too harsh for that, his presence too overwhelming. But there was something magnetic about him, a gravitational pull that made it hard to look away. "What's your name?" he asked, though Lord Brennan had already provided it. "Elena, Your Majesty." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Small victories." "Elena," he repeated, and the way he said it, careful, deliberate, made it sound like a different word entirely. "Why were you hiding in the corridor?" The question caught me off guard. I'd expected formality, distance, the kind of impersonal assessment I'd witnessed him performing on the room before. Not this. Not genuine curiosity. "I wasn't hiding," I said, then immediately regretted it. "You didn't contradict an alpha. I just needed a moment." The crowd... I trailed off, unable to finish without sounding pathetic. The crowd overwhelmed me. The crowd made me feel small. The crowd reminded me I didn't belong here. Something flickered in his eyes, not quite amusement, but close. "You don't like gatherings like this." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "No, Your Majesty." "Why did you come then?" "My father." I stopped, reconsidered. Blaming my father felt like cowardice. It was expected. Expected? He turned the word over like an unfamiliar object. Behind him, the lean man with dark skin shifted, his intelligent eyes moving between us with an expression I couldn't read. "And do you always do what's expected?" The question felt like a trap. If I said yes, I was weak, obedient, boring. If I said no, I was difficult, rebellious, unsuitable. I chose honesty instead. "I do what causes the least trouble," I said quietly. For the first time, his expression changed. Not a smile. I wasn't sure this man was capable of smiling, but a slight softening around his eyes, like I'd surprised him in a way he hadn't anticipated. "An honest answer," he said. Rare in rooms like this. He studied me for another long moment, and I forced myself not to fidget under that intense scrutiny. I was acutely aware of how I must look compared to the other women here. My too pale hair falling out of its pins, my ill-fitting dress, my complete lack of polish or presentation. "A wildflower in a bouquet of roses," Vivian had said. She wasn't wrong. "Tell me, Elena," the Alpha King said, his tone shifting into something almost conversational. "What do you know about the Northern Territories?" The question threw me again. Not much, Your Majesty. Only what everyone knows. That you united the packs 3 years ago. That the territories are stronger now than they've been in generations. That's the political answer, the public story." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell winter air and something darker. Smoke, maybe, or the scent of pine forests after rain. "But what do you think? Do you believe the northern packs are better off under unified rule?" It was definitely a trap. It had to be. No one asked questions like this unless they were testing loyalty or looking for reasons to eliminate potential threats. But his eyes held something that looked almost like weariness? No, that couldn't be right. Alpha Kings didn't get tired. "I think," I said slowly, choosing each word carefully, "that unity probably came at a cost. But I also think that fractured packs fighting among themselves cost even more. So, yes, better off, even if it wasn't gentle." The mountain of a guard made a sound. Surprise, maybe. The Alpha King's eyes narrowed slightly, but not in anger. In interest. "You think I was harsh," he said. "I think you did what you believed was necessary," I corrected. "There's a difference. Is there?" "I hope so." Silence fell between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was strange, standing here having an actual conversation with the most powerful alpha in 2 centuries, while hundreds of people watched in stunned confusion. This wasn't how these things were supposed to go. He was supposed to survey the prospects, speak with pack leaders, make calculated decisions based on bloodlines and territory, not interrogate minor nobility about political philosophy. "Your Majesty," Lord Brennan ventured, his voice uncertain. Perhaps we should continue with the formal introductions. There are several young ladies from prominent houses who— Give me a moment, the Alpha King said, not looking away from me. Lord Brennan fell silent immediately. Elena, the Alpha King continued, and again that careful pronunciation of my name, like it mattered. I'm going to ask you something, and I want the truth. Not what you think I want to hear. Not what's polite or diplomatic. The truth. Can you do that? My throat went dry. I can try, Your Majesty. If you were in my position, if you needed to secure an alliance with the Southern Pax through a political bond, what would you look for in a partner? The question was absurd. I wasn't in his position. I would never be in his position. I was a nobody from a fallen house who could barely navigate a dinner party, let alone understand the complexities of interpack politics and royal strategy. But he was waiting, those storm-gray eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made lying impossible. I would look for someone I could trust, I said finally. Not someone with the best bloodline or the most influential family. Those things matter for strategy, but they don't matter at 3 a.m. when you're making decisions that will affect thousands of lives. I would look for someone who would tell me the truth even when I didn't want to hear it. Someone who would— I don't know. Someone who would still see me as a person, not just a position. The words hung in the air between us. Around us, the hall had gone absolutely silent, that particular quality of silence that happens when everyone is holding their breath at once. The Alpha King stared at me for what felt like an eternity. Then he turned to the lean man beside him. Silas, clear the hall. Your Majesty? Silas's eyebrows rose. You heard me. Everyone out except the council leaders. He glanced at Lord Brennan. We'll reconvene tomorrow evening. I need to think. Chaos erupted. Voices rose in confusion and protest. Lord Brennan looked like he wanted to object but didn't dare. Women who had spent hours preparing for this moment stood frozen, unable to comprehend being dismissed. My stepmother's face had gone from white to purple, and Celeste looked like she might actually burst into flames. Through it all, the Alpha King kept his eyes on me. Not you, he said quietly, and it took me a moment to realize he was speaking to me. You stay. My father materialized at my elbow, his voice low and urgent. Your Majesty, surely my daughter should— Lord Thorne. The Alpha King's tone could have frozen fire. Your daughter stays, unless you'd like to argue with me. My father stepped back as if physically pushed, his face gray. He looked at me once, something unreadable in his expression, then allowed himself to be swept away with the departing crowd. Within minutes, the Grand Hall had emptied except for the Alpha King, his 3 companions, Lord Brennan, and 2 other council members I didn't recognize, and me, standing there in my ill-fitting dress, wondering if I'd somehow managed to ruin not just my own life, but potentially my entire pack's standing. The Alpha King turned back to me, and for the first time, something that might have been a smile touched his lips. Now, he said, let's talk. The conversation that followed wasn't what I expected. The Alpha King, Dante, he'd told me to call him after the first 10 minutes of stilted Your Majesty exchanges, didn't ask about my bloodline or my pack's resources. He didn't inquire about strategic advantages or political connections. Instead, he asked me about books. You read, he'd said. Not quite a question. I saw it in the way you chose your words. Careful, considered. We'd talked until dawn began to paint the eastern windows gold. About philosophy and history, about the costs of leadership and the weight of choices. His 3 companions, Silas, the intelligent one, Garrett, the mountain, and Tobias, the watchful predator, had eventually settled into chairs around the hall's edges, alternating between listening and conducting quiet conversations of their own. The council members had excused themselves after the first hour, clearly uncomfortable with whatever unprecedented thing was happening. I learned that Dante had unified the Northern Pax through a combination of strategy and necessary violence that still haunted him. That he'd inherited a fractured territory on the brink of civil war and had 3 weeks to prevent it. That he was 28 years old, and sometimes felt ancient. I told him about my mother, about losing her and watching my father disappear into grief, about becoming invisible in my own home, about learning to make myself small to avoid conflict, about the strange comfort of books, where you could live 100 different lives and none of them had to be your own disappointing reality. When the sun finally rose, he'd stood and offered me his hand. Tomorrow evening, he'd said. There's a dinner with the Southern Council. I want you there. Your Majesty, Dante, I don't belong at council dinners. No, he'd agreed. You belong somewhere more interesting than that. But I need someone who'll tell me which council members are lying through their teeth. And I think you're observant enough to spot it. That had been 3 days ago. Now I stood in front of a mirror in a guest room of Lord Brennan's estate, trying to recognize the person staring back at me. The dress wasn't mine. None of this was mine. Dante had sent it this morning with a note in sharp, precise handwriting. Wear this. Ignore anyone who tells you otherwise. The gown was midnight blue, simple in design but clearly expensive, fitting perfectly in a way my cream dress never had. My hair had been arranged by a maid who'd appeared at my door with instructions from His Majesty's household. I looked not beautiful exactly, but present, visible, like someone who might actually belong in important rooms. A knock interrupted my spiral of anxiety. I opened the door to find Silas, Dante's advisor, his dark eyes assessing me with the same sharp intelligence I'd seen that first night. He sent me to escort you to dinner, Silas said. Fair warning. You're about to walk into a nest of vipers who are very confused about why you're still here. That makes 2 of us, I muttered. Silas's mouth quirked. He likes you. Don't ask me why. I've known him for 5 years and I still can't predict what he'll do half the time. But he trusts his instincts, and his instincts are usually right. He paused. Usually. That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. Come on. The dining hall was smaller than the grand hall, but no less intimidating. A long table dominated the space, already surrounded by council members and prominent pack leaders. I recognized Lord Brennan at one end, my father seated midway down looking distinctly uncomfortable, and my stepmother beside him wearing an expression of barely controlled fury. Celeste sat across from them, her red dress a calculated choice. She looked like power and confidence, and everything I wasn't. When she saw me enter with Silas, her eyes narrowed to slits. Dante stood at the head of the table, deep in conversation with an older woman I didn't recognize. He looked different in the candlelight, still harsh, still imposing, but there was something almost human in the way he listened to whatever the woman was saying, his head tilted slightly in concentration. Then he looked up and saw me. The conversation around the table didn't exactly stop, but it stuttered. Eyes tracked me as Silas led me to an empty chair, right beside Dante's position at the head of the table, the seat of honor, or the most exposed position in the room, depending on how you looked at it. Elena, Dante said, and there was warmth in his voice that hadn't been there when addressing the others. Thank you for coming. Your Majesty, I managed, hyper-aware of every gaze burning into me. He pulled out my chair himself before the servants could move, a gesture that sent another ripple of shock through the room. Alpha Kings didn't perform such courtesies, especially not for minor nobility from fallen houses. As I sat, I caught Celeste's expression across the table. If looks could kill, I would have been Ash. Dinner began with all the ritual formality these things demanded. Courses appeared and disappeared. Wine flowed, and conversation moved through carefully neutral topics: weather, hunting, the quality of this year's harvest. But underneath the pleasantries, tension coiled like a spring wound too tight. I mostly stayed quiet, listening. Dante had asked me to observe, to watch for lies and hidden agendas. It wasn't difficult. Lord Brennan smiled too much when discussing territory disputes. A sharp-faced man named Councillor Hayes kept steering conversation toward the wealth of his pack's lands, obviously angling for consideration. My stepmother interjected occasionally with comments about bloodlines and proper alliances, each word a thinly veiled criticism of my presence here. Your Majesty, she said during a lull in conversation, her voice honey-sweet. Forgive my boldness, but many of us are curious about your intentions regarding the Southern Alliance. There are several excellent candidates from established houses. Her eyes flicked to Celeste, then to me, the comparison obvious. I'm sure you'll want to consider all options carefully. I always do, Dante said mildly, cutting into his venison, which is why I value diverse perspectives. Of course, my stepmother continued undeterred. Though some perspectives are naturally more informed than others. Experience and breeding do matter in these situations. Celeste leaned forward, seizing the opening. Father always says that strength recognizes strength, that true alphas need partners who can match them in power and presence. Her smile was aimed at Dante, calculated to charm. Not everyone is suited for leadership. The implication was clear. Not everyone meant me. I felt heat creep up my neck, but kept my expression neutral, focusing on my plate. This was what I was good at, becoming invisible, letting insults slide past like water off stone. But Dante set down his fork with a deliberate click that silenced the table. "Interesting theory," he said, his voice carrying an edge I recognized from that first night. Danger, leashed but present. In my experience, people who constantly announce their strength are usually compensating for something. Real power doesn't need advertisement. Celeste's smile faltered. Across the table, my father closed his eyes briefly. "And as for partnership," Dante continued, his gaze sweeping the table before landing on me, "I've found that the most valuable allies are often the ones who see clearly, rather than the ones who shine brightest. Substance over spectacle." My heart stuttered. He couldn't mean, no. This was just him being diplomatic, defending a guest at his table. It didn't mean anything. But under the table, I felt something brush my hand. Dante's fingers, just for a moment, a touch so brief I might have imagined it. Except I didn't imagine the way my skin sparked at the contact, or the way his jaw tightened slightly before he returned his attention to his meal. The dinner continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. People chose their words more carefully around me now, uncertainty replacing dismissal. I caught Silas watching from his position further down the table, something approving in his expression. Later, after dessert had been cleared, and people began drifting toward the parlor for drinks and continued networking, Dante caught my elbow. "Walk with me," he said quietly. It wasn't a request. We slipped out through a side door into the estate's gardens. The night air was cool, smelling of roses and approaching rain. Lanterns lit winding paths through carefully manicured hedges. For a few minutes, we walked in silence. The sounds of the dinner party faded behind us, replaced by cricket song and the whisper of wind through leaves. "You're angry," Dante said finally. I blinked. "I'm not." "Yes, you are. You're just very good at hiding it." He stopped walking, turning to face me. In the lantern light, his features seemed softer somehow, less carved from stone. "Your stepmother and stepsister spent half that dinner trying to humiliate you, and you just sat there and took it. What else was I supposed to do?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "Make a scene? Defend myself and prove them right that I don't belong? I learned a long time ago that fighting just makes things worse. That's not strength, Elena. That's survival. Maybe survival is all I know." He studied me for a long moment, then reached out and took my hand. The touch was gentle, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. "What if you didn't have to just survive anymore?" My breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that 3 days ago, I walked into a room full of people performing for me, and the only person who felt real was hiding in a corridor." His voice dropped lower. "I'm saying that every conversation I've had since then feels hollow, except when I'm talking to you. I'm saying, 'Your Majesty.'" Garrett's voice cut through the night, urgent. He appeared on the path, his massive form moving with surprising speed. "We have a situation, northern border. We need to leave. Now." Dante's expression shifted instantly, warmth replaced by cold calculation. "How bad?" "Bad enough. Riders came in 10 minutes ago. There's been an incident." I stepped back, already understanding. Whatever this moment had been, it was over. He was the Alpha King, and the Northern Territories needed him. But Dante's hand tightened on mine. "Elena, I have to go, but this conversation isn't finished." He pulled something from his pocket, a small silver wolf carved from stone, no bigger than my thumb. "Keep this. He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face. "It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died. For luck." "I can't take this," I whispered, staring at the small wolf. "It's too—" "Keep it safe for me," he said firmly. "I'll come back for it. And for you." Before I could respond, he was gone, striding back toward the estate with Garrett. I stood alone in the garden, clutching a stone wolf and trying to understand what had just happened. Behind me, a twig snapped. I turned to find Celeste emerging from the shadows, her beautiful face twisted with rage. "You think you're special," she hissed, moving closer. "You think because he's paying attention to you that it means something. But you're nothing, Elena. A diversion. Entertainment. The second he gets bored, he'll toss you aside like the trash you are. Celeste. He's an alpha king. He could have anyone. Why would he ever seriously choose someone like you? She laughed, but there was something desperate in it. You're not strong enough, not important enough. You're the girl who hides in corridors because she can't handle crowds. You think that's what royalty looks like? Each word was designed to hit old wounds, and they did. Doubt crept in like fog, cold and suffocating. She was right, wasn't she? This was all temporary. A strange aberration. Men like Dante didn't choose women like me. They chose women like Celeste, confident, powerful, bred for positions of leadership. But my fingers tightened on the stone wolf. Maybe you're right, I said quietly. Maybe I'm not strong enough or important enough. Maybe I am just a diversion. I looked up, meeting her eyes. But he gave me this to keep safe. Not you. Not any of the other women in that room. Me. Celeste's face went white, then red. You little... Celeste. My father's voice cut through the garden. He stood on the path looking between us. For a moment, I thought he might defend me, might actually stand up for his daughter. But he just looked tired. Come inside. Both of you. People are starting to talk. Of course. Can't have people talking. I walked past them both, my head high even though my hands were shaking. Back inside the estate, the party was winding down. Silas found me near the entrance. Dante wanted me to make sure you get back to your quarters safely, he said. Then, quieter, he doesn't give away things from his mother lightly. Just so you know. I nodded, not trusting my voice. That night, lying in the guest room's enormous bed, I held the stone wolf up to the moonlight streaming through the window. It was beautifully carved, worn smooth by years of handling. I could imagine a young Dante clutching this, finding comfort in its solid weight. I'll come back for it. And for you. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that this impossible thing happening between us was real, and not just some fantasy I'd constructed from scraps of attention and a few kind words. But belief was dangerous. Hope was dangerous. Still, I fell asleep with the stone wolf clutched in my hand, and for the first time in years, I didn't dream of being invisible. 2 weeks passed without word from Dante. 2 weeks of living in a strange limbo at Lord Brennan's estate, where I was treated as neither guest nor servant, neither important nor dismissible. The other women who'd been summoned for the selection had mostly returned to their homes. But my father had decided we should stay. Just in case, he'd said, though he wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it. Celeste made sure those 2 weeks were miserable. She accidentally spilled wine on my books. She told anyone who would listen that the Alpha King had obviously reconsidered his momentary lapse in judgment. She laughed loudly whenever I entered a room, sharing whispered jokes with Vivian and Serena that always ended with their eyes on me. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I'd expected this. The silence, the abandonment, the proof that Celeste had been right all along. Men like Dante didn't choose women like me. Whatever I'd thought I'd seen in the garden had been wishful thinking, nothing more. But every night, I held the stone wolf and remembered the way he'd looked at me, the way his voice had softened when he said my name, the warmth of his hand on mine. On the 15th day, everything changed. I was in the estate's library, my refuge when Celeste's torment became too much, reading about the history of the Northern Territories, trying to understand the man who'd given me his mother's keepsake and then vanished. The afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, and I'd almost achieved something close to peace when the doors burst open. Garrett stood there, his massive frame filling the doorway, looking exactly as intimidating as he had that first night. "Miss Thorne," he said, and there was urgency in his voice. "You need to come with me. Now." My book slipped from my hands. "What's happened? Is Dante?" "He's alive. But he's asking for you." Garrett's expression was unreadable. "There's a carriage waiting. Bring whatever you need for a few days." "I don't understand." "Neither do I," Garrett admitted. "But when the Alpha King sends me to fetch someone, I don't ask questions. Are you coming or not? I should have been more cautious, should have asked more questions, demanded explanations, but something in Garrett's voice, a thread of concern beneath the gruffness, told me this was serious. "Give me 5 minutes," I said. I ran to my room, threw clothes into a bag without caring what I grabbed, and stopped only to tuck the stone wolf safely into my pocket. When I rushed back down, I nearly collided with my father in the hallway. "Elena? Where are you?" His eyes went to the bag in my hand, then to Garrett waiting at the end of the corridor. Understanding dawned on his face, followed by something that might have been fear. "You're leaving?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Dante sent for me. The Alpha King," my father corrected automatically, then shook his head. "Elena, you need to be careful. Men like him, positions like his, they're dangerous to get close to. Especially for someone like you. Someone like me. Always someone like me. Too weak, too quiet, too ordinary to handle anything important." "I know," I said softly. "But I'm going anyway." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or the ghost of pride. He nodded once and stepped aside. The carriage ride took 3 hours, heading north into territory I'd never seen. Garrett rode up top with the driver while Tobias, who'd been waiting at the carriage, sat across from me in the cabin, his watchful eyes tracking every movement. "You can ask," he said finally after an hour of silence. "Ask what?" "What happened on the border? Why he sent for you?" Tobias leaned back, studying me. "You want to know." I did. Desperately. But I also didn't want to seem presumptuous. Didn't want to overstep whatever undefined boundary existed between me and Dante. "Only if you want to tell me," I said carefully. Tobias's mouth quirked, not quite a smile, but close. Diplomatic answer. "You're learning." He was quiet for a moment, then sighed. There was an ambush. Small group, but well coordinated. They were specifically targeting Dante, knew his route, his schedule, everything. We handled it, but he paused. He got hurt, not badly, but enough. And when he woke up after the healers finished with him, first thing he asked for was you. My chest tightened. "Why?" "That's what I'd like to know." Tobias fixed me with a hard stare. "I've known him since we were teenagers. Watched him build an empire out of chaos. He doesn't let people in, doesn't trust easily, doesn't ask for comfort because he doesn't think he deserves it." He leaned forward. "So why you?" It was the same question I'd been asking myself for 2 weeks. "I don't know," I whispered. "I'm not special. I'm not powerful or strategic or—" "No," Tobias agreed. "You're not, but maybe that's the point." He settled back again, his expression softening slightly. Maybe he's tired of people who want something from him. Maybe he just wants someone who sees him as a person instead of a position. The rest of the journey passed in contemplative silence. We arrived at a compound I didn't recognize. Smaller than Lord Brennan's estate, more fortress than palace. Stone walls, practical architecture, guards stationed at regular intervals. This was a place built for function rather than display. Silas met us at the entrance, his usual composed expression strained around the edges. "Elena?" he said, relief clear in his voice. "Thank you for coming. He stopped, reconsidered his words. "He needs to see you." "Is he okay? Physically?" "He'll recover. Everything else?" Silas shook his head. "Come on." He led me through corridors that smelled of stone and wood smoke, up a staircase, down another hallway. Finally, he stopped at a heavy wooden door. "He's in there. Fair warning. He's not in the best mood. The attack rattled him more than he wants to admit, and Dante doesn't handle vulnerability well." Silas met my eyes. "Be patient with him?" I nodded, my heart hammering. Silas knocked once, then opened the door. "I found her," he called inside. Then, to me, quieter. "Good luck." The room beyond was simple, a large bed, a desk covered in maps and documents, a fireplace burning low. And sitting in a chair by the window, his shirt half unbuttoned and bandages visible beneath, was Dante. He looked up when I entered, and the expression on his face stole my breath. Relief. Raw, unguarded relief. "Elena," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on my name. I crossed the room without thinking, dropping my bag, my careful composure, everything. When I reached him, he pulled me down into his lap, gentle despite his obvious strength, careful of his injuries, and buried his face against my shoulder. We stayed like that for a long time. His arms around me, my hands in his hair, neither of us speaking. I could feel tension draining out of him, the rigid control he always maintained finally loosening. "I'm sorry," he said finally, voice muffled against my dress. I should have sent word, should have explained. But the attack, and then the recovery, and... He pulled back, looking at me. I couldn't stop thinking about you. Couldn't stop worrying that you'd think I'd forgotten, that you'd believe whatever poison your stepsister was undoubtedly pouring in your ears. She said you'd gotten bored, I admitted. That I was just a diversion. His jaw tightened. I should have her thrown out of the territory. Dante, I'm serious. His hands came up to frame my face, thumbs brushing my cheekbones. You're not a diversion. You're not entertainment. He stopped, searching for words. Do you know what it's like? Being surrounded by people every moment of every day, and still feeling completely alone? Having 100 advisors, and not being able to trust any of them to tell you the truth? I know what it's like to be invisible, I said softly. That's its own kind of loneliness. You're not invisible to me, his voice was fierce. From the moment I saw you in that corridor, trying to escape notice, you were the only real thing in that entire hall, and every conversation since has just confirmed it. You don't want anything from me except honesty. You don't perform or manipulate or angle for advantage. You're just... you. Tears pricked my eyes. I don't know how to be anything else. Good, don't learn. He leaned his forehead against mine. I need that. I need you. The words hung between us, heavy with implication. This wasn't just about companionship or alliance anymore. This was something deeper, something that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. The attack, I said, changing the subject before I got swept away completely. Tobias said they knew your route, that it was coordinated. Dante's expression darkened. Someone in the Southern Council is feeding information to my enemies. Has been for months, probably. We just didn't have proof until now. He stood, lifting me with him, then set me gently on my feet. That's why I need you here. I don't trust anyone in the South right now except... He stopped. Except what? Except you. He moved to the desk, pulling out maps marked with routes and positions. I know it's not fair to ask this. I know you didn't sign up for political intrigue and danger. But I need someone I can trust to help me figure out who the traitor is. Someone observant. Someone they won't see as a threat. I studied the maps, my mind already working. You want me to spy. I want you to observe, listen, report back. He turned to me. And before you say yes, you need to understand. This could be dangerous. If someone realizes what you're doing, they could come after you. I can provide protection, but I'll do it. He blinked. Just like that? You asked for my help. You trusted me enough to bring me here, to show me these maps, to... I gestured at the room, at the vulnerability he'd displayed. Yes, just like that. For a moment, he just stared at me. Then he crossed the space between us in 2 strides and kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It was fierce and desperate, and full of all the things we hadn't said. His hands tangled in my hair, my fingers gripped his shoulders, and for a moment nothing existed except this, the heat of him, the taste of him, the rightness of fitting together like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known was incomplete. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine again. Stay, he said, not just tonight. Stay here where I can keep you safe, where I can... He swallowed hard. Where I can see you every day and know you're real. Okay, I whispered. Okay? Yes, I'll stay. The smile that broke across his face transformed him. For just a moment, he wasn't the alpha king bearing the weight of 2 territories. He was just a man who'd found something he didn't want to lose. That night, after he'd shown me to a room adjacent to his own, after dinner with his inner circle where Garrett, Silas, and Tobias treated me with careful acceptance, after hours of discussing strategy and suspicions, I lay in an unfamiliar bed and thought about how much my life had changed in less than 3 weeks. I'd gone from invisible to essential. From hiding in corridors to standing at the center of political intrigue. From believing I was too small for anything important to being trusted with secrets that could shift the balance of power between territories. The stone wolf sat on the nightstand, catching moonlight. A soft knock made me sit up. Dante stood in the doorway, still in his bandages, looking uncertain in a way I'd never seen. Can't sleep? I asked. Nightmares, he admitted, about the attack, about... He stopped. Can I pulled back the covers in answer. He crossed the room and slipped into bed beside me, careful not to crowd, clearly trying to maintain some propriety despite the intimacy of the situation. But I turned into him, resting my head on his uninjured shoulder, and felt him relax. "Thank you," he murmured against my hair. "For what?" "For being here. For staying. For—" His arm tightened around me. "For making me feel less alone." I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of him, smoke and winter air, and something uniquely Dante. "You're not alone," I whispered. "Not anymore." In the darkness, I felt him smile. The next 3 weeks moved like a dream I was afraid to wake from. Days I spent carefully observing. Dante had arranged for me to attend council meetings as his advisor on Southern affairs, a deliberately vague title that gave me access to important conversations while making me seem harmless. The council members barely noticed me at first, too focused on posturing and politics to pay attention to the quiet blonde woman taking notes in the corner. But I noticed them. I watched Lord Brennan's eyes flick nervously to the door whenever border security was mentioned. I saw Councillor Hayes receive a message during one meeting and immediately steer conversation away from northern patrol routes. I observed the patterns of who spoke when, who avoided certain topics, who seemed to know things they shouldn't. Nights I spent with Dante. Sometimes we talked strategy until dawn, mapping out suspicions and evidence. Sometimes we just existed together, him working through endless documents while I read beside the fire, our silence comfortable in a way I'd never experienced with another person. And sometimes, when his nightmares got bad, or the weight of leadership pressed too heavily, he'd find his way to my room, and we'd fall asleep tangled together, finding peace in proximity. We hadn't discussed what we were to each other. The question hung unspoken between us, too fragile and too important to examine too closely. But his hand found mine under council tables. His eyes sought me out in crowded rooms. And when we were alone, he looked at me like I was water and he was dying of thirst. I was falling in love with him. Had probably been falling since that first night in the Grand Hall when he'd looked at me and actually seen someone worth seeing. The realization terrified me, but I couldn't stop it any more than I could stop breathing. On the 22nd day, everything came to a head. We'd called a special council session. All the Southern leaders, Dante's inner circle, and a carefully selected group of guards. The stated purpose was to discuss new trade agreements. The real purpose was to catch a traitor. I sat in my usual corner, appearing to review documents while actually watching every face, every reaction. Dante stood at the head of the table, commanding the room's attention as he outlined proposed changes to border patrol schedules. "The new routes," he said, gesturing to a map, "will allow for more efficient coverage of the Eastern Territories. We'll implement them starting next week." I watched Councillor Hayes lean forward, studying the map with more intensity than the topic warranted. Watched him pull out a small notebook and sketch something quickly. Watched his eyes dart to the door, calculating. Silas, standing behind Dante, caught my eye. I nodded once, slightly. "Actually," Dante continued, his voice casual, "there's been a change of plans. We'll be implementing these routes tonight instead of next week." Hayes's pen stopped moving. His face went carefully blank, too blank, the expression of someone trying not to react. "Tonight?" Lord Brennan sputtered. "That's highly irregular, Your Majesty. Our people need time to prepare. The people who need to know have been informed," Dante said coldly. "I'm only telling this council now as a courtesy." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Several council members exchanged confused glances, clearly sensing something beneath the surface but not understanding what. Hayes stood abruptly. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, but I'm feeling unwell. Perhaps I should—" "Sit down, Counselor." Dante's voice cracked like a whip. "We're not finished." Hayes remained standing, his hand moving toward his jacket. Garrett materialized behind him, massive and immovable. Tobias blocked the door. The trap had sprung. "You see," Dante continued, moving around the table with predatory grace. "We've had a problem. Someone has been leaking information about patrol routes, security measures, my personal schedule, someone with access to council meetings and classified documents." He stopped in front of Hayes. "Someone who's been selling that information to my enemies for months." Hayes's face had gone gray. "You can't possibly think—" "We found the messages," Silas said, producing a folder. "Hidden in your study. Coded, but not well enough. You've been corresponding with a faction in the north that wants to destabilize the unified territories. They paid you well for your betrayal." The room erupted. Voices rose in shock and anger. Lord Brennan looked ready to faint. Several council members began demanding explanations, protesting their own innocence. Hayes lunged. Not toward the door, toward me. It happened so fast I barely had time to process. One moment he was across the room, the next his hand was locked around my throat, a knife pressed to my ribs. The stone floor was cold against my knees where he'd forced me down. "Nobody move," Hayes snarled, "or the girl dies." The room froze. But what stopped my heart wasn't the knife or the hand cutting off my air. It was the expression on Dante's face, pure, undiluted rage. His eyes gone almost black, his entire body vibrating with barely controlled violence. "Let her go." His voice was soft, deadly. "Let her go and I'll make your death quick." "I don't think so." Hayes's breath was hot against my ear. "I walk out of here, or you lose whatever this thing is to you. And we both know which matters more to an alpha king, pride or one unremarkable girl." The knife pressed harder. I felt it break skin, warm blood trickling down my side. The pain was sharp and immediate, cutting through my fear. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I'd spent my whole life being small, being quiet, being forgettable, letting people like Celeste and my stepmother and now this traitor treat me like I was nothing, because I'd believed that's what I was. But Dante had seen something different, had trusted me with secrets and strategies, had looked at me like I mattered, not despite my ordinariness, but because of the qualities I'd always thought were weaknesses. My ability to observe, to listen, to see truth beneath performance. I wasn't nothing. I'd never been nothing. The stone wolf in my pocket pressed against my hip, solid and real. "You're right," I said, my voice strained but steady. "I'm unremarkable, forgettable." I met Dante's eyes across the room. "But I'm also closer to your knife than your guards are." And I slammed my head backward into Hayes's face. His grip loosened just enough. I twisted, driving my elbow into his stomach, using every dirty fighting trick I'd ever read about in books I'd pretended were just fiction. The knife clattered to the floor, then Garrett was there, hauling Hayes away with one massive hand. Tobias secured his arms, and Dante. Dante caught me as I stumbled, his hands frantically checking the wound at my ribs. "It's not deep," I managed. "I'm okay." "You're not okay," he said roughly, his hands shaking as they pressed against the cut, trying to stop the bleeding. "You're... Fuck, Elena, you could have been killed." But I wasn't. I gripped his shirt, forcing him to look at me. "I'm here. I'm fine." The healer arrived, gently pushing Dante aside to examine the wound. As she'd said, it wasn't deep, painful and bloody, but not dangerous. Still, Dante hovered like a thunderstorm about to break, his eyes never leaving me. Hayes, restrained by Garrett and Tobias, was shouting now. Accusations, justifications, desperate attempts to bargain. Silas and the other council members were sorting through the chaos, securing evidence, making arrangements for a formal trial. But I only had eyes for Dante. When the healer finished bandaging me, declaring I'd be fine with rest, he pulled me up gently and led me out of the council room, through corridors, upstairs, into his private quarters. He didn't speak until the door closed behind us, shutting out the world. Then he turned to me, and the careful control he'd been maintaining shattered. "Don't ever do that again," he said, his voice breaking. "Don't ever." His hands cupped my face, thumbs tracing my cheekbones like he was memorizing them. "When he had that knife to you, He stopped, swallowed hard. "I would have burned the world down if he'd hurt you." "He did hurt me," I pointed out. "Don't." His forehead pressed to mine. "Don't make jokes. Not about this." "Dante." I wrapped my fingers around his wrists, holding his hands to my face. "I'm okay. We caught the traitor. It's over." "It's not over." He pulled back, searching my eyes. "Elena, I need to tell you something. He took a shaky breath. "I love you." The world stopped spinning. "I love you," he repeated, the words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. "I've loved you since you stood in that corridor looking lost, and I realized you were the only honest thing I'd seen in years. I love your mind, and your courage, and the way you see through everyone's bullshit. including mine. I love that you're not impressed by power or position, that you treat me like a person instead of a king. I love—" His voice cracked. "I love everything about you, and when I thought I might lose you today, I realized I can't do this anymore. Can't pretend this is just an alliance or a partnership or whatever diplomatic term we've been hiding behind." Tears streamed down my face. "Dante, I know I'm asking for something impossible. I'm the Alpha King. I'm supposed to choose someone strategic, someone who brings political advantage, someone from a powerful family." His hands tightened on my face. "But I choose you. Just you, if you'll have me. If I'll—" I laughed through my tears. "You idiot! Of course I'll have you." "I love you too." The kiss was different this time, not desperate or fierce, but tender. A promise. A beginning. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pulled something from his pocket, a ring, simple silver, set with a single midnight blue stone that matched my eyes. "Marry me," he said. "Not for alliance, not for politics. Marry me because you make me laugh and you call me on my shit and you make me feel less alone. Marry me because I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night for the rest of our lives." "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The formal announcement of our engagement shocked the Southern Territories. There were protests, certainly, from those who felt the Alpha King should have chosen someone more appropriate. Celeste reportedly threw such a tantrum that she was asked to leave Lord Brennan's estate. My stepmother tried to claim credit for raising me properly, which Dante shut down with one withering look. But there was also support. People who'd felt invisible themselves, who saw something hopeful in the story of an overlooked girl becoming queen. Common pack members who didn't care about bloodlines or politics, who just liked that their king had chosen love over strategy. My father came to visit 3 days after the engagement announcement. We sat in the garden where Dante had given me the stone wolf, the space where everything had changed. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for not seeing you, for letting your stepmother and Celeste treat you the way they did, for being so lost in my own grief that I forgot I still had a daughter who needed me. I wanted to stay angry. Part of me still was angry, but I'd learned something important over these past weeks. Holding on to pain didn't make you strong. It just made you heavy. I forgive you," I said. And I meant it. He cried then, my stoic father who'd barely shown emotion since my mother died. And I held his hand and let him. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, in the same grand hall where Dante and I had first met. But this time, I wasn't hiding in corridors. I walked down the aisle in a dress the color of starlight, my pale hair crowned with winter flowers, my head high. Dante waited at the altar, flanked by Garrett, Silas, and Tobias, the brothers he'd chosen, who'd become my friends and fierce protectors. His eyes never left mine as I approached, and the smile on his face was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. When we spoke our vows, I promised to be his truth-teller, his refuge, his partner in all things. He promised to see me always, to value my strength, to build a life where neither of us had to be alone ever again. "I love you," he whispered, as we sealed our vows with a kiss. "I love you too," I whispered back. "My king, my home." Years later, I would stand in that same hall, now truly mine as much as his, and tell our daughter the story of how we met. How her father had looked past all the beautiful, powerful women to see a scared girl hiding in a corridor. How I'd learned that being underestimated was sometimes the greatest advantage. How love found us in the space between expectation and truth. She would touch the stone wolf I wore around my neck, the one Dante had given me that night in the garden, which I'd never taken off, and ask if fairy tales were real. "Some are," I would tell her, kissing her pale blonde hair so like mine. "The best ones sneak up on you when you're not looking. When you're just trying to survive, and suddenly you find you're living instead." Dante would join us then, wrapping his arms around both of us, and we'd stand together in the hall where everything began. No longer alone, no longer invisible, no longer afraid, just 3 people who'd found their way home to each other. And that, I would think as our daughter's laughter echoed through the ancient stone, was better than any fairy tale ever.